Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And on this one, of course, Merry Christmas to everyone. I hope you guys are enjoying the holidays. Basically also hope that you guys have the freedom to choose what makes you most comfortable, whether it is to join your family or in some situations perhaps still deciding to enjoy the holidays alone, not taking too many risks. I can definitely understand both sides. It's not always easy in these chaotic times, but I hope that you all make the best of it, and of course that we'll have a better 2022 with FanFest. I am personally really looking forward to that, which does mean that on the EVE development front we don't have a lot of news. There was a pretty big sale, 50% off I think, for like 3 months Omega with 3 codes or something like that. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to have impacted the market, but a 50% sale is pretty significant. And then on the development news, we don't have any real news. Obviously, it's the holidays for CCP as well, so let's give him a little bit of a break. But I mentioned that before, since CCP is planning to hold a FanFest, and I think it's going to be for like the 19th year of EVE Online, I do think that they are going to keep a lot of the announcements in reserve for FanFest itself. So I'm not expecting too much personally in the first quarter of this year, except for the compression change. Of course, we know that should be coming early next year. But yeah, don't have too much news itself. So let's take a quick look at the New Eden store as always and see what's happening over there. Assuming that the Yole star skin is still front and center. A yearly skin, it's definitely a pretty cool one with a nice animation, so I can understand that. And then we actually have a couple of sales here: Ruby Sungrazer skin and Ishtar Kai Neon skin. It is pretty cool, and on the Nemesis as well. So you do have some. Ooh, here a Sarum skin that looks pretty good on an Amar ship for sure. Astero Semiotic Superluminal skin. Well, you get a couple of sales, so if you are into the skins, you can definitely keep an eye on the New Eden store, because you get sales from time to time. And then on the services front here within the shop, we don't see anything special. And you may have noticed, maybe I mentioned that before, that my number of plex has gone down. It's because I bought a rattlesnake skin. It was just I'm using it so much that I wanted to give it a skin, and it's become the vampire one, the blood one, really dark red, very, very cool in my opinion. But yeah, let's move on to the market itself. Of course, we are as always going to start with some plex and stuff, and that's coming in at 250. There we go, and let's get started with that plex chart. And here we go. All right, not exactly what I was expecting, because we're actually seeing a bit of a jump up despite the higher volumes in the last couple of days. And we landed on the 275 million average price on that 5-day moving average chart. And then in the last couple of days, we're basically going back towards a 1-year high point, which we get that little double top here, October, November, almost 3 million, never really making that, definitely not breaking that. And from this we needed to recover a little bit down towards December, then a bit of sideways movement. And despite the sale that's happening now, it should, I think, increase availability, or unless it's not really possible to translate it directly to plex. No, we are seeing that increased price, which is quite impressive actually. Practically 3 million for the sellers in GTA itself, almost 2.8 million for the buyers. And if we take a look at what's happening in the player-owned trade hubs, well, there's a little bit of pressure here, heading back towards 2.9 million, a couple thousand here, couple thousand there. So there's definitely a little bit of selling pressure showing up there as well. And then on the demand side, they are pushing up in price as well, I think. Yeah, up in price just a little bit, back towards that 2.8 million, really closing the margin within the player-owned trade hubs. This is a tiny margin here between the first seller and the first buyer. But pressure seems to be up, and that's the real question. Will we be able to basically make our way towards 3 million and then break it, yes or no? Curious to see how that is going to, what's going to happen there. In January, I don't really expect too many sales there, so perhaps with a lull in potential discounts, we could see that pressure continue and finally a break towards above 3 million. Not sure if it is going to happen, but I'm definitely keeping that in the back of my mind. Then we've got the multiple pilot train certificates, a little bit more of a sideways movement with, well, at least in the last week or so, definitely seeing the daily averages going up slightly. We're talking above 1.45 billion for the sellers and almost 1.4 billion for the buyers, to show that demand seems to be strong despite these rising prices, but that there's also enough demand to keep prices somewhat in check at certain price points, which I think again for Plex is 3 million. There's plenty of people that are willing to sell just below 3 million, and for the multiple pilot train certificates, it's a really tough time to break out towards that 1.5 billion again. The skill extractors next, not seeing the volume spike, but definitely the following of the Plex chart here, going back up after landing on that 330 million, back at 336 for the sellers and 330 million for the buyers. I think again it's this part of the chart that may not be entirely accurate. This should be above 340. And we're not really seeing, unless it's in JITA then, oh yeah, there we go, it's a 346 in JITA itself, so that's interesting. Actually, JITA is, despite having cheaper prices in the Tranquility Trading Tower, it looks like JITA has enough volume on the sellers happening that these daily average prices are actually above 340 million ISK. So that upwards pressure does seem to be here. Demand feels pretty strong for Plex and directly related items. So let's see what's happening in the injector market. Large scale injectors, a completely reverse movement from Plex. That's shooting up decently well here. We've got a pretty big correction. Yeah, if this is really the price point, like below 640, then this is actually to me a massive correction from 680, a high point that was maintained for almost 2 months now, but finally we're breaking down and we are going back down. 675 million for the sellers, but below 630 million for the buyers. And a bit of pressure, absolutely. Perimeter Trading Tower, 650 million, showing that pressure here as well on the large skill injectors. Not really sure how to speculate on that. My thoughts here were that this was definitely around New Dawn, and that quite a few characters did probably use skill extractors and skill injectors in order to, maybe change your call pilots to something else and things like that. Perhaps they're done. That is definitely possible. Now that the patch has been out for a little bit, they've developed a new meta, they've changed their characters, and so that extra demand is all of a sudden dropping off, meaning that we do get this big correction. But it's difficult to say, of course, exactly why this is happening, since this large scale injector market, which is part of the reasons why I personally do like the item as like a longer term investment. Basically it gets influenced by a lot of stuff. Skill extractor prices, thus also Plex prices, but also general vibe in the game, the need for skill points, and so it gets affected by perhaps the ending of the events, right? We do have a very big one at the moment, not really throwing out that many skill points, perhaps they're expecting that to actually pick back up for some reason, and then you get this sort of stuff. So it's not an easy one to read, and that does potentially make it very interesting, but also a little bit more volatile, and it can move in unexpected ways. Here is the small scale injector market, seeing that pressure as well. Latest data point closer to this is where the this is probably going to be the 135 million mark. Yeah, 135 for the sellers, 125 for the buyers. We're not seeing much difference between JITA and the Tranquility Trading Tower on this one. So here, I still think that this is actually a 135 rather than the 140. But maybe it's just like a mathematics thing where this one rounds up for some reason, where it perhaps would be more logical for it to round down. I'm not exactly sure, but yeah, this is actually not a 140 million, but a 130 million on this price range. And the pressure here, it's here as well, just not as noticeable and as clear as what's happening in the large scale injector market. For the final injector, we've got the daily alpha injector, and honestly, I think for everyone that's looking for a stable market and a reasonable market, this is pretty good. We're still above 40 million, but on average, just below 42.5 million here. One seller, in fact, coming in at 39, but most just above 42 million. Buyers at 39 million, pretty narrow margin, less than 10%, right? Just 3 million between sellers and buyers, or most sellers and buyers, I should say. And this is a doable goal. So for me, this is honestly something that I do think is on the books for the way CCP is looking at the game at the moment. And this is perhaps something that we do have to keep in mind. If you're looking for from the perspective of CCP wants to basically also keep a certain level of control by providing sales and by providing certain rewards in the events in order to keep things stable, then this would be like the prime example of them doing so. Daily alpha injectors go above 50 million, which becomes definitely a harder goal to reach for a daily alpha player than hovering at that 40-45 million range for most of the year. And then they come in with a very big sale that crashes the price down to less than 40, and there's so much volume here now that we actually have a period where we're just right back on that, to, in my opinion, a nice sweet spot where 40 million a day seems to be something that alpha players can set themselves as a goal. And so I like the item from that perspective. I'm personally more of this should be a sandbox, this should be perhaps more hands-off. But on the other hand, I think we all acknowledge that there are forces out there that make the game unfair, like botting and things like that. And so that CCP is keeping a finger in the pie in order to keep things somewhat in check. That does make sense as well. It is their game after all. But we should keep that in mind. I think if you ever really see, especially a real-life money-related item do completely crazy stuff, you should never be surprised that CCP actually intervenes to cut some of those heads off that poke out a little bit too much. A little bit of a CCP in China reference there as well, perhaps. But let's keep with the billionaires there that keep disappearing from time to time. But finally, we get the hypercores. Let's not get into that type of stuff. Hypercores back below 300,000 ISK. Less than 300,000 for the sellers, especially in Tranquility Trading Tower, and then 290,000. Again, really narrow margin here, showing, in my opinion, still a decent demand for all of this stuff as well. And so we're around that 300,000. We definitely have to give a little bit from the high point at 330. But we are still relatively expensive considering the full 1 year chart on the hypercores. Next up, the mineral market, 1250. There we go. As always, we'll start with titanium, and you can see that the increase in price could not maintain itself. We did touch 5.5 ISK for the daily average price of titanium here, but then supplies have probably found their way back, and we're back on honestly a reasonable medium that was also found by the market right after the industry changes. So I would still say that considering the lower need that there exists now for titanium in the game in general, 485 for the sellers and 465 for the buyers is definitely not a bad price. You saw me do a bit of a mining session in the Mackinac. You're not getting massive returns on this at this point, but I do also think that we have to accept that this is the way things are basically labeled at the moment. You do have your own market and minerals in HiSec, but they are the cheapest, the most ubiquitous, and so you're getting in relative safety behind the Concord umbrella or response. You can mine in relative safety. Especially if you're willing to give a little bit of yield for more tank, and then you're getting a certain return. But if you really want to, get a big bang for your buck for the time that you're spending, you're gonna have to go into nullsec, into low sec, maybe even into podven or something like that to find those more exotic minerals. So titanium is on the way back, but definitely still on a reasonable average in my book. Pyrite did not make the upswing and is in fact seeing a little bit of pressure here as well. I would say below its average consensus price after the industry changes. 16.6 ISK for the sellers and 16 for the buyers. At least the logic is back that pyrite is more expensive than titanium, but in general definitely a little bit of a depressed price, showing that perhaps mining in HiSec is popular enough that at the moment there's more supply than what the game needs, and Mexelon was on the way up. Here's our one exception, which I do find very interesting. You can see this starts to feel like a breakout, right? We started to feel, are we going to get below 55 here? Then we went well above 62, 62.5, and now we're making our way above 70 at this point as well on the chart. Almost 71 for the sellers, 65.5 for the buyers. They're definitely being a little bit more careful to close that gap too aggressively. But for Mexelon, I do think that this is interesting. This is something that back in the day, you guys probably remember, we did get a much better price for Mexelon despite the overall overabundance in minerals in general in the game. And the reason for that was that if you do industry in nullsec from the HiSec minerals, Mexelon tends to become your first bottleneck. At least it was like that before the industry changes. You need even less titanium now, so I don't see any reason why that would change, and that could definitely explain why Mexelon seems to have a far stronger increase in price that has a much more staying power than titanium, for instance. So if you're mining in HiSec, well, at the moment I would say the tip is to definitely focus on Mexelon if you can find sources for that. Then we've got Isogen, that is, well, pretty good news, heading back on that 125. Definitely having a little bit of problem really breaking through that one, and we'll probably see some sell orders, yeah, like this here, right? That's a nice big group of sell orders that's keeping us well within that 126 range here. So there are still those reserves out there, but we're also not seeing 100 plus million, so they're absorbable, especially if industry in general would start to go back up a little bit more. Then this to me starts to really feel absorbable by the market, although there's quite a few of them here. That's definitely some 10 millions here as well, heading to that 130. But what is to me interesting is that you can start to see these sellers are making smaller and smaller batches, right? 4 million, 12 million, 11 million probably, 20, a little bit more, 16. Here's a couple of 50s, so that's definitely a lot. But then you get some below 10s, quite a few below 10s here that are spreading their prices out, trying to feel out what is actually going to become that consensus price, or how can I sell. And so it's between how high will Isogen eventually go on active supply demand, and how can I try to sell at the moment for as good a price as possible. And so here you're seeing that, and they're going for a 124 to the 127, then even a 129, and then we get a 130, 131, 135, 138, 40. All of these price points are already being tested by sellers, making sure that if the price does manage to get there before other reserves come in, they actually manage to get a couple of sales. And yeah, we saw this, it's only 11 days to go, so probably won't be too successful, but someone even set up the biggest volume of 200 million units just below 500 ISK, perhaps a little bit early with that one, but I'm still not willing to say that that price will never be possible for Isogen. You can clearly see that the market is bumping up these prices continuously as demand at the moment, I think, and especially at these prices, is outstripping active supply by quite a bit. Then we've got Noxium, and so, oh, maybe I should mention this as well, right? I just said, if you want to go into low sec, for instance, you want to hunt for those other minerals to get a nice return. Unfortunately, of course, Isogen isn't exactly in that spot just yet. It is still probably relatively cheap compared to the risk that you're taking, but eventually I do think that Isogen will become one of those minerals as well, just like Noxium, which at the moment is really breaking back out, breaking that 1250, massive trend break compared to the last 6 months here. This is pretty important data point, I think. 13.25 for the sellers, 12.25 for the buyers. Very, very expensive Noxium, and so obviously if you want that bigger return on maybe even a cheaper ship and a lower amount of time, try to find Noxium. You're looking at some pretty massive returns. Most expensive Tech 1 mineral at the moment, and that's coming from low sec. Does make sense and gives me a lot of hope for Isogen as well. Then we've got Zydrine from nullsec. That's actually giving back a little bit of room. 1,000 for the sellers, 950 for the buyers. My read on that could definitely be in line what we're also seeing for the injector market, is that nullsec probably adapted for a large part at least to the new situation, and that those supply lines are starting to come online. So we definitely will have a lower yield in general, but as things start to settle down, Zydrine will find its way back to the market, get a bit more competition here, even from nullsec within GTA 4.4. It means a little bit of pressure on the price. And Megazite actually, after spiking up to 800 disc, is also giving back some ground. And we are back at, well, 721 for the sellers. Definitely still a premium compared to before the New Dawn patch, where we were below 600 disc. And buyers are at 660. They're still willing to pay at least like a 10% premium compared to the New Dawn patch. So for Megazite, it does look like lower yields are starting to affect this market, although they did so without the predictive power that the Zydrine market showed here. This was more on the announcement, and the market said that should mean lower potential yields. It should take more time to bring all of that Zydrine into the game, despite the fact that its potential is doubled. And so the Rorcal being out of commission, that should increase the price. Megazite did not move that way, but now had a pretty big price response on the patch actually hitting the game, which made for an interesting opportunity. Of course, if that would have been your gamble and you would have bought basically at the low point, probably could have bought below 550, and then you could have maybe sold at 750 or something like that for the Megazite. It's pretty good. Volumes rising here again. I'm gonna quickly check on that. Zydrine not too noticeably, but let's see if Noxium volumes actually up this month for sure. That's kind of unusual. Isogen seeing some volume spikes there as well. Maybe a sign that some industry pickup is starting here and there. Probably nullsec then, if I had to gamble. Finally, we get Morphite that is continuing the downward spiral. So this looks very, very bad on the chart, but I think if you follow EveTalk, you know that this is quite relative. Although we have a one-year low point at the moment, heading towards 50,000 disc. This is still, like, in my opinion, 5 times its previous normal price range. So this is still very expensive. 56,000 for the sellers, 53,000 for the buyers. That is still, of course, a nice pullback from the 100,000 plus Morphites. That was extremely expensive, and definitely a bit of, that was starting to become a problem in the Tech 2 market. And then this one, for me personally, is also another show of that philosophy from CCP, that they are willing to step in when an individual item starts to get out of hand, like here with Morphite at 130,000. That was definitely a little bit ridiculous, and so they, even in September, before the end of scarcity, they were already willing to basically increase the availability of Morphite. They did that together with some ice at that point, and it seems to be continuing for now, which I've mentioned before as well. Again, the amount of resources available have doubled, and so despite the fact that it should probably take a longer time in the new composition than just a massive fleet of Rorcals to bring everything into the game, you are of course going to give priority to Morphite since it's that much more profitable. Let's move on to PI next. That's coming in at 2340. And there we go. Let's see if things are continuing or stabilizing. So the story in general for PI has been one of more mixed messages. So a little bit of speculation on what CCP actually will do also comes into play at this point, because we reached 1-year high points on basically the industry changes that meant we needed advanced PI materials in building large ships. That meant a very large new pool of demand that supported these higher prices. You can see here August, September, throughout the summer, a very good time to have and produce broadcast nodes. But as we reached that 1-year high point and the market finally recovered a little bit from that, I'm going to speculate that that is also on people changing their PI setup to take advantage of all of the new situation. We came out with CCP announcing first that they were going to reduce the amount of PI needed in the construction of the large ships, which just increased that movement. And then they even came out with an announcement that they were going to add PI materials to moon mining, which really I think pulled the rug under any confidence that was still left in the PI market, that in general was already oversupplied. But then eventually CCP came back on that idea, and that was basically the reversal moment where we got a little bit of a recovery, but looks to me like we're stalling here. We're not going back to like a 1.5+ million for broadcast nodes at the moment, and maybe the market's a little bit careful here. Who knows what CCP will actually end up doing. The general trend, and I've mentioned this before, of course, is that PI is very passive, and CCP has really, shown that active gameplay is what they want to be rewarded, want to see rewarded, and passive gameplay like PI, they don't mind if that's not that doesn't generate too much worth in the game. So broadcast nodes, below 1.3 million for the sellers, below 1.2 million for the buyers. You can see here how demand is basically way less than supply, and I think it was way stronger back here when you needed more of it for construction of larger ships. Construction blocks is doing a little bit of a comeback, but that's still relative. 7,700 for the sellers, less than 7,000 for the buyers. So although sellers are able to go up just a little bit, buyers are still below 7,000 discs, so we could pull back very quickly, very sharply, in my opinion. And well, construction blocks, historically speaking, 10,500 average was pretty easy. So this, I think, is that PI was already seriously less valuable than, let's say, a couple of years ago. We do have decent demand here, although it's one page of 6,000 pluses, and then we're going to the very opportunistic buy orders down here. So I wouldn't say there's that much strong demand here either. Consumer electronics continuing, the pain of being below 6,000 disc on average, 6.2 for the sellers, 5.7 for the buyers, showing that dumping to the buyers is happening even now. I think this was one of the items that lost like 50% of its value compared to maybe a couple of years ago. Coolants breakout, 1-year high point. There are exceptions, of course, and they seem to be in fuel-related PI materials. Very good news for me. That was always my philosophy for PI. Fuels are constantly used in the game. They have a consumption aspect to it, right? If you need broadcast nodes to build carriers, there is a consumption aspect to that because carriers get blown up as well, but players tend to be risk averse with more expensive assets, and so you generally do have a build-up of inventory that keeps a lid on things. But if there's this constant consumption, the only thing you can really do with fuel blocks is to use them in order to do something else in the game. Then I saw that you would have this stronger potential demand in a lot of situations, and that is a winning combination at the moment. 12,000 ISK for coolants, 11,000 for buyers. This is even a high price historically speaking, because it's so easy to produce coolants on gas planets. So this is a great time to be selling your coolants at the moment. We haven't seen this opportunity in a pretty long time, although the last couple of months have been very, very reasonable for coolants. But yeah, if you made that choice there as well, very easy, very, very available. Even in high sec, you can make coolants super easily, and at the moment you're getting a very reasonable price for that. Cryoprotectant Solutions is making a little bit of a comeback as well. 120,000 for the sellers, 112,000 for the buyers. I would say is in a reasonable historical range as well. As we all should know by now, this is tied to implants. So I do think you can see the volumes here as well. That part of this maybe it's the events. Let me know in the comments if this is now pure speculation on my part, but if perhaps some implant BPCs drop from event sites in the Winter Nexus events. That could explain this. Or it could be partly speculation as well on eventually something like compression implants or stuff like that needing to find their way into the game. Know what? Whichever it is, we are paying very high prices for cryoprotectant solutions, and throughout this period here I constantly mentioned when we were substantially below 100,000 disc that if you wanted in on that potential trade on something happening around implants, you should have bought, and you could have probably bought like at 90,000 or something like that back then. So you're looking at a nice potential 30% profit pretty easily on those buys. Enriched uranium next. It is tied to fuels and not really the winner of these, which is a little bit surprising to me because enriched uranium is actually harder to make than coolants or mechanical parts. We're talking still below 9k on average, 9,150 pretty much for the sellers and 8,850 for the buyers. Much more narrow margin, right? That should be very noticeable. Broadcast nodes, construction blocks for instance, 7,700 to less than 7,000. That's like that 10% margin. That is pretty normal. For the enriched uranium, you have like just a couple hundred disc in difference between sellers and buyers, maybe 300 or so. So much stronger demand for the fuel related PI materials at the moment. Integrity response drones, here was that drop off. Here is the, all right, we're not gonna put PI into the moons. So we had a little bit of momentum, but you can see that we are stalling already. 1.6 million to 1.45 million. A little bit stronger demand here in the integrity response drone, so slightly better price, but no full recovery on this one. Then we get mechanical parts tied to fuels, definitely making a 1-year high here as well. Again, not as good as coolants, 8,200 for the sellers, 7,300 for the buyers. Pretty large margin here as well. Gotta be a little bit careful. So I would say this is also a good time to be selling mechanical parts at the moment, even though it's not 11, 12k from coolants. Then we get nanites stuck at 5,000 discs, not really going anywhere, 5,000 to 4,600, tied to implants and to, nanite repair paste. So it does have a consumption element to it as well, but apparently not enough to really bring that price back up. Nano factories, same story, right? High point here in September on that stronger demand with the industry changes. We start to recover from that. CCP makes their announcements. We hit a low point, losing 30% from the high point below 700,000 disc. We recover a little bit, but again, that recovery is stalling already. 800,000 for the sellers, 730,000 for the buyers. Organic mortar applicators, actually even worse news, as we get a couple of lowering tops and then we keep testing these bottoms. So this one could really become one of the victims. You can also see this one never went above really 1 million ISK. So here the extra demand must not have been very substantial. Less than 700,000 for the sellers, just above 600,000 for the buyers. Definitely at the low end of the price range. If you ever see this below 600,000 ISK, it actually starts to look interesting to buy some of this stuff. Here's the demand, and then here is the supply, kind of explaining all of that pressure, of course. Recursive computing module still struggling with an annoying data point, but this one you can see here as well. Buyers are testing that 900,000. We're a little bit above that, so slight recovery, but still not doing great. Here is the demand. That's clearly not enough. 1 million for the sellers and 930,000 for the buyers. On the robotics front, it is tied to fuels, so there is a consumption element to this one as well, but historical reference, 100,000 disc was pretty easy, so this is still not great. 64,000 for the sellers, 63,000 for the buyers. At least the margin is gone, so it does show that demand has picked up. But it just can't break out of the bad streak. This is its new range, as I've said, probably in line with the philosophy that CCP has now, where PI is passive, so it doesn't have to make a lot of ISK. It's just probably not going to move out of that too sharply. There's plenty of supply out there. Self-harmonizing power cores, kind of the same story here again on all of that CCP news, the recovery, but yeah, it's just not lasting. 1.3 million to 1.2 million, when throughout most of the summer you had prices above 1.5 million. Sterile conduits, again, same story, touched a million, right? Nice little comeback, despite the fact that 1.2 million was possible throughout the summer, and then now we're still well below a million, 935 to 900,000. Our Yukomi superconductors, so another specialized material, 75k, that's still not great, 80 to 68. Look at that demand again. This can't browse here. Can't browse in the supply here either in JITA. That's interesting. We do have the Perimeter Tranquility Trading Tower coming in with more supply and not with more demand. Yeah, it's definitely above the average for the year, but historically speaking, not great. Maybe a little bit more trading happening on this one on the volumes here, but at the moment, not seeing as a reason why this would change ranges or anything like that. Then we get to Weightware mainframes, which again, advanced PI, so high points in the summer. Almost 1.8, 1.9 million here, definitely above 1.75 a couple of times. Then you get that CCP news cycle below 1.5, managed to get back above that, but the pressure is already back. 1.55 for the sellers, 1.45 million for the buyers. So yeah, for PI, not a great week, with one exception, right? If you were looking for the simplest option, basically, you get that fuel consumption, you get the Easy Planet, you get plenty of availability in high-sec heat coolants, and surprisingly enough, that is the winner at the moment, with a one-year high point that even historically is a great price. So that's very good for me. Of course, I probably mentioned that in some Sunday recaps, but I have been slowly selling coolants that have been building up over the last couple of years, I would dare to say. As I don't want to spook the market, that's definitely part of the play there as well. Don't bring everything to the market right away. Make sure you can slowly take advantage of these higher prices, and that's what's happening at the moment. Next up, advanced wood materials, 35.50. I do have to blow my nose here for a second. Sorry about that, but let's get started. Here are the carbides, crystalline carbonite for Galente. Alright, it's stabilizing above 175, so we get that premium with the industry changes that's baked in. We can see that lower and lower volatility, and at the moment we're talking 184 to 180, and this is really a play of supply, right? You get a little bit more supply on the higher prices, you go back below the 175, then it dries up a little bit, needs a little bit of time to chew through all of that, we get back above the 180, and so you get a nice little cycle that about a year ago was around the 150 mark, now it's around the 175 mark, but it's not too volatile. If you were looking for real trade opportunities, that was around the industry changes. Then we get the Caldari one, which is titanium carbide, right? Same story. Here is the 150 range, here's the 175 range. This one's probably a 175 to 200, a little bit more expensive than the Galente one, 193 to 185. Supply is a little bit better. But it's still on the upside at the moment, so we'll probably start to edge back down, but it's the same story, right? A lower volatility since the industry changes, and finding that new slightly higher range is definitely not a crazy premium. Ferrite carbide, 125 to 150, 150 to 175, but counter to the previous two, this one is actually on the downside at the moment, so we should see more supply on this one. 153, yeah, at least we can browse a little bit through this one, and you can see it's not that much in volumes. That's bringing us down from 170 to 152, 153 on that front page. Demand is pretty steady, but this is the story at the moment in the carbides. A little bit of supply, not even that much, can bring the prices back down. Market chews through that, we go back to that higher range, and it's all within very reasonable ranges though. Tungsten for Amar, you could say one exception, unless we are really at the low point right now, because we started at 125 to 150. We're back in the 125 to 150 range at the moment, 145, but we get to 150, 160 again decently quickly. Buyers though below 140. So for tungsten carbide, you basically have next to no premium at the moment, but if the bounce back can make its way back above 150, then we do have a slightly higher range, and I think it's entirely possible. Then we've got the metamaterials. For Galente, it's photonic metamaterials. We saw this last week, unexpected spike. Kind of, for me, a bit of hope that we are going to see some volatility back into the Tech 2 ship market eventually as well. Went up to 20k, tries to recover from that, but still 16,000 for the sellers and 16,000 for the buyers is still very expensive compared to just a couple of weeks ago, where we were at bottom prices of less than 11,000 ISK. Then we've got the Caldari one, which is right here, non-linear metamaterials, back on the upswing, and look at that, it's not great, but a 1 year low point, and then we are getting back to that average 22.5. It's a decent swing, not super tradable. We do need some breakouts to make that better, but 21,500 to 20,500, definitely showing that despite the average prices that up until the summer, I would say, and even including a big part of the summer, were very nicely centered around that 22.5k. Right now we are starting to see some wavy patterns that are at least testing the limits of those ranges. That's interesting. Then we've got the plasmonic metamaterials for Minmatar, and yeah, again, despite the fact that we could see the same pattern as with carbides here with the lower and lower volatility, the settling around 17,500 ISK, today's daily average is above 20,000 ISK, which is something we haven't seen in like the last 6 months or so. So sellers are completely drying up, couple coming in now at 19k, so plugging that gap very quickly. 19,000 as well for the buyers though, so that demand is strong enough. Very interesting. There is, to my surprise, right, a sign that potentially a little bit of volatility is brewing in the meta material. So perhaps keeping an eye on potentially low buy prices could be interesting. As we may be seeing wild terrors metamaterials, well, no, but we do have this outlier here that in November we went to 1 year low point at 12,500 ISK. We're at 14.5 to 13.5 right now, and which is still definitely pretty low for the average range of terahertz metamaterials. So most of the others seeing some upward pressure, being expensive and even a little bit of a breakout in the Galente one. The MR one, yeah, a little bit more pressure on that one, and those were also the ships that showed a lot of buy opportunities over the last couple of weeks and months in Tech 2. Other advanced boom materials, fermionic condensate settled down below 65,000 ISK, so not much to say here except it manages to get back on its yearly average, which is still pretty low. Then we've got ferrogel, had a spike as well, but look at that, fully recovered back at the low price point of below 30,000 for the sellers, 27,000 for the buyers. That's really showing that oversupply in the other advanced boom materials is a real problem. Any increase in prices gets squashed pretty damn quickly, and we can sometimes even test low points with this. Fullerite 720 to 712, so that's still really not a great price. Remember a couple of years ago, 1,000 ISK was an easy average for Fullerites. Hypersynaptic fibers, back below 9,000, so same story, we spike up to 11k, finally, looks like we get a breakout, but supply finds its way and we're right back at the low end of the range. Nano transistors just has its little spike up to 4,500 ISK, 4.7 in fact to the sellers, 4.3 for the buyers. But yeah, we've been here before, here in October. We went up to 5,000 ISK, and just look at how heavily the market squashes that afterwards. So I would not be surprised if by next week we're back below 4,000. Then we've got phenolic composites doing a double step back up, but coming from a 1 year low point. That's really not that much, slowly crawling back to an average price. 1540 for the sellers, 1500 for the buyers. Definitely not like a massive sell. Slow upwards pressure in pressurized oxidizers, okay, but definitely not a tradable move or anything like that. And then it's a little bit of, well, I would say, stabilizing on reinforced carbon fibers. Still not much to say on these charts. And ceramic fibers are still pretty low, just above 300 ISK. Definitely again the low end of the range, which is already not a great price. But the slight volatility that we're starting to see potentially brew in the metamaterials could be interesting for Take-Two. So let's take a look at these at 43.30. There we go. Let's, as always here, start with the Basilisk. And alright, well, it's still not great, but not that long ago you could have easily bought below 190 million. You're selling at 214. Buyers are still below 190, so this is still not that much of a demand-driven price spike, but it's here, right? We haven't seen a daily average data point from just a couple of days ago at 230 million in quite a while. There is supply that's very easily plugging that gap with a decent amount of ships. So the times for Twitch trading are not here yet in my book, but this is another slight sign that perhaps volatility is brewing in the Take-Two market, which would be great, of course, for actively trading these ships. And for the people that have been following me and that have slowly been buying at the 1 year low points or close to that in order to try and find those really cheap ships and then be ready for when volatility does come back. And in fact, from the 1 year low point right here, you could have probably bought close to 180 or maybe even below 180 if I remember correctly. Then you already have a decent trade right now. But I'm definitely looking for the pattern of returning spikes like that. Cerberus definitely not doing so. We're actually under pressure. Not a 1 year low point, but are we buying below 200 million? Yeah, there we go. Buyers 197. So you are buying below this line here. We are in pressure at the moment, so I would say this is the right time. If you don't have your cheap Cerberus just yet, this would be a good time to try and grab that one. Preferably below 200 million. You can maybe, if you really want it, right, put up 201 million, and I'm pretty sure you're getting it as well. But you're buying really cheap at the moment, which again, if the Basilisk is any sign, we might start to see that volatility come back. And so that has been my tactic. I mentioned that since pretty much the summer, that we're just looking for the cheapest buy opportunities, like what we spotted in the garden here as well. Definitely a breakout that we hadn't seen in a very long time. We're not breaking out on the upside just yet. Amar is still relatively cheap as well in the production costs, I think, but less than 180 for the sellers, 170 for the buyers. 170 for the buyers. Yeah, it's not the best buy opportunity, but you're still buying relatively cheaply. So again, if you're not ready, maybe you can look into those investments, but I would honestly constantly look for charts where you're seeing that pressure before jumping in. It's just gonna increase the chance that your buy order will trigger, and the garden is not in that point right now. It was so early December. Then we get the Hound, where we had the trade, and in fact one of you guys commented that you got some nice profits on this Hound spike, which to me is another one of these telltale signs that maybe it's coming back. How long has it been since we have seen a stealth bomber break out well above 30 million? Look at that, close to 1 year high point, and not that long ago, a couple of months ago, I must have mentioned that you could probably have bought close to 20 million. So that's a nice 50% potential profit on that one. We're on the way down, of course, 27 million for the sellers, 26 for the buyers. So even if you if you bought at those really cheap prices, you get some cheap Hounds, you still have a bit of a profit. But what I'm mostly looking for is, yes, this is a tradable spike up. This is something you can look out for and then really try to sell at a very nice profit. And we haven't seen that, as you can see on this chart, in a pretty long time. We have the Ichthyorsa in here mostly to keep an eye on trick stuff. Very interesting here as well. Look at these daily average data points and look at this, this stability here, and then this wavy pattern that is, to me, it feels like it's pushing against the previous limits, both on the upside, where it's definitely succeeding, but also on the downside, where if it breaks below 600 million, at some point we are going to get back into that, this is a buy and this is a sell, which has been very hard to find here, of course. But if this can gain a little bit more momentum, then we could make it there. Ichthyorsa now selling for 814 million. Buyers are at 605. Look at the spread between those two. potentially, again, to me, another sign that Tech 2 volatility might be on the books. Of course, we never know. This is an unpredictable market, and CCP may do some stuff as well if they don't like too much volatility. But for us traders, I would say I hope you're ready. I hope you have your cheap ships ready, like also when you could have bought Ishtars well below 190. 206 for the sellers, 192 for the buyers. We're still pretty close to that, but you're definitely not at the best buy opportunity anymore. And you can in fact see that some people are already here with pretty big numbers if it happens again. So you do have to be on the money. You gotta keep a close eye on the market to really find those bargains. But right now, unfortunately, this is also not the price spike we were hoping for. Then we get the Manticore also still moving in that 25 to 30 million range, although average here below 25 is interesting. 24 million for the sellers, 24 million for the buyers. If you can get rid of this one, and you are already buying no matter what well below 25 million. I would say it's reasonable to do so, but make sure you don't buy all of them. A little bit like with the Ikitursa here, what I'm hoping is that the Manticore can eventually bump up against this on the downside as well, where we could break through and have the chart that goes back towards like a 20 million low point, so that we get that this has to be a buy, and then hopefully the trigger for volatility, so that we can get back well above 30, and then you've get that pattern back. It would be very nice, and yeah, here I feel like it's trying, right? Sellers at 24 million, that should put enough pressure to eventually really push us back to that lower range. Unfortunately, apparently I'm not the only one looking at this, and we get plenty of buy orders ready below that 24 million range very, very aggressively, despite the fact that there's not that many of them, which is keeping that in check at the moment. But that sell pressure might eventually just make that happen. So yeah, it's not a great sign just yet, but I think it has that potential yet again. The Munin still buying below 180, no 183. Again, a couple of buyers that are like pretty aggressive. Right now, of course, we're back on the upswing, so you're not gonna trigger that buy order, but if we're back down, you can. Be of course careful when the daily trading volumes are too low, then don't go above one ship. Nemesis settling at the lower end of the range, unfortunately still on the pattern of we're lowering our volatility, but eventually that should have a limit as well. Of course, if sellers are close to 23 million, and they are at 23 million, buyers are just above 20 million, you're squeezing that margin so hard that eventually I'm hoping that this can break down, that you get that nice buy opportunity, and then we could potentially be off to the race. I'm honestly liking what I'm seeing from that perspective in the Tech 2 market. Onero's also completely settling, crushing every margin. 165 million for the first seller, and it's even two ships, something that's hardly traded. 153 million for the buyers. There's no buyers in the market. You know, if you want to be ready with some really cheap Tech 2 ships, there's definitely opportunities out there at the moment. Panther, all right, bit of a breakout above 1.3. Yeah, 134 billion for the sellers, 1.2 billion for the buyers. Not enough supply for everyone that would love a Panther. Increased volumes as well. Not yet, I would say, a big breakout, right? We've been here before within the last 6 months. But I'm kind of hoping that this can again increase the wave, and a sign of maybe higher prices, which is why we get the battleships here, which could just add to that volatility. And here again, you've got those peaks that just keep going down, those low points that keep going down as well. So we should have a very narrow margin here, and it is 25 million for the sellers, 23 million for the buyers. You know, and unfortunately, again, quite a few buyers that are going to keep us from like really breaking down, let's say below the 20 million to get that very clear buy signal. That's not happening just yet, but with this type of sell pressure, it could eventually happen. Scimitar coming back from a 1-year low point at 180, so probably last week or the week before that I should have mentioned that you could try to buy, and you still can, right? It's a 171 million for the buyers. That's pretty damn low on this chart, but keep one thing in mind: when that average is up, it's a lot harder to grab that buy order than when you're at the end of the downslope. That's really the timing that I've mostly been looking at in order to try and buy some stuff. The widow showing some upwards pressure as well, 1.25 billion getting to 1.3 pretty quickly, and buyers are forced up towards 1.2 billion as well. And then we get the Zealot. That was also, one of my early hopes that maybe volatility is back, and let's hope that we can actually continue on this type of momentum. So we got this 1 year low point, we got that breakout that I'm hoping we can see in quite a few of these other ships with very, very narrow margins, where eventually, those sellers put that much pressure that we actually get a breakdown in the buyers, that they are finally able to go lower to that 1 year low point, which is a very clear buy opportunity. And then if volatility does come back like here, you can buy at probably a 170 range and then sell at 230, 240 a couple of weeks later. That's what, of course, we're all hoping, I think, makes its way back. We're back at below 190 for the sellers and 173 for the buyers, so we're definitely already buying a decently low, but then the question is, does this wave have enough momentum to keep repeating itself? Of course, that would be very, very cool. And we'll see if I'm right or not, but I am seeing signs that that pressure is building, and that eventually, that volatility might just make its way back into the Tech 2 ship market. For right now, I would still say look for these downtrends, look for these cheap buy opportunities, look for stuff that's close to 1 year low point in order to try and grab some of these really cheap Tech 2 ships at the moment, so that you're ready. If it then does happen, I do think you're looking at potentially some awesome profits. Next, we've got the Tech 3 ship market coming in at 55 minutes. Okay, a bit of a longer one, but let's keep going. Here is the confessor for the Tech 3 destroyers, continuing to see pressure despite the fact that it was already the cheapest one, and in fact probably a little bit after my Eve talk we got to a 41.5 million average price for the confessor. We're not there anymore. 45 million or just below for the sellers, 42.5 for the buyers. We still have 60 of them here, so that's still putting pressure on the price, and you are buying, let's say, for 43 million. Honestly, depending on what the others are doing, let's keep that in the back of our mind. This could be a buy opportunity for the confessor. The Hecate went up to 55 and is staying well above 50 million, 51 for the sellers, 47 million for the buyers. Supply wise, still not that much. 4 sell orders, what is this, 8 ships in the last 24 hours, right? Despite the fact that the confessor is that much cheaper, it still commands 10 times more ships to come in 24 hours. So this doesn't feel like this is going to change. That margin is still right there. Then we get the Jackdaw, that despite what's happening with the confessor is able to increase its price as well above 50 million ISK. 53 for the sellers, 48 million for the buyers, and no supply for the Jackdaw. And then finally we get this Vepel that is finally showing some signs of pressure, and that is now going for 47 million for the sellers, 44 million for the buyers. So you're buying the confessor that's honestly a really good tactical destroyer as well, at the cheapest price of all of them. It is still drawing in the most supply, unless I didn't look at the numbers for this Vepel. Yeah, last 24 hours, yeah, that's like 10-15 ships. So it's still drawing in most supply. I think we are back in that game where I could predict this should go up. This should go up for a pretty long time, but the market has shown that it has that inertia. But I'll be honest, buying confessors for 43 million already seems like a good deal. And I'm kind of hoping that if we keep an eye on this, that eventually we get this breakdown here as well, where it'll go to like maybe 40 million. And then of course we should really probably stock up on a couple of confessors, as maybe the situation could then move to another one of these tactical destroyers. It is of course, there's a gambling element here, but I think if you look at all these relative prices, you're buying confessors for less than 43 million. And Hecates are selling well above 50, Jackdaws are selling well above 50, and even this Vapel doesn't have the supply and is selling well above 45 million. That already starts to look pretty interesting. Although the closer to 40 million you can buy, I think the better the deal you are getting. Something to look to just keep an eye out for, I think. Then we've got the cruisers. Here is the Legion. I think we all know that this spike was due to the Winter Nexus. Yeah, because those rats are basically perfect targets for the Legion and its laser weapons. We are recovering from that at the moment, selling for 195 million, buyers at 183, basically back in the normal range. The Loki hasn't really moved. This is a 198 to 182, so you can see that's back in the normal range for the good, in my opinion, tech tree cruisers, at least from the meta perspective. Then we get the least popular one. Here is the Proteus. You can see this one went well below 180, is now going for a 189 to 170, so this one is cheaper, but yeah, it's definitely not as strong in general a platform, I think, and especially in PvE. I don't like it that much at the moment, despite the fact that it's been my only tech tree cruiser for a long time. And then we get the Tengu. That's also a very good PvE platform, 200 million to 185, maybe even a little bit more expensive than the Legion and the Loki, which to me makes sense as well, because if you're looking for ease of use, of course, passive big shields with missiles and potentially drones, that still makes a hell of a lot of sense as well. So the tech tree cruiser market to me feels like it has become a lot more in line with a healthy usage base in general. I think that the fact that you don't lose skill points when flying tech or losing a tech tree ship anymore will have helped to normalize this quite a little bit. It does mean, in my opinion, that we'll see less volatility and maybe even fewer manipulation events in this tech tree ship cruiser market at this point, which, well, may not be good news for people that like to gamble on them, which was definitely possible if you look at, for instance, this part of the chart. But yeah, for now, I would say these all make perfect sense. They're well supplied. There's a healthy spread between sellers and buyers, so you can try to buy on the cheap. You can sell for reasonable prices. There's little reason to see massive disruptions, unless of course something happens like a rebalancing, an event that's great for them, maybe a nullsec fleet or something like that. But unless something there's a real trigger, I don't see these as being that much that interesting for trading. Oh, I know I do need to drink. That's better. So yeah, for these, unlike this imbalance in the confessor compared to the others, that to me does make sense to look out for. And that leaves me with the extra product for the week. Been going for a pretty long time already, over an hour, so I'm gonna make it easy on myself. 10059, and we're gonna do the fuel blocks. See what's happening here, as we already spotted that what part of the production cost coolants is up substantially. And despite that, yeah, helium fuel blocks, very reasonable back where we were a year ago, pretty damn cheap. 18,300 for the sellers and 17,200 for the buyers, and not really going anywhere. Same story, of course, then for the hydrogen fuel blocks. All these have completely normalized in the game. Very little difference between all these fuel blocks. So just above 17.5 on the chart, 17,750 to less than 17,000 for the buyers. Nitrogen fuel blocks, same story, right? This is the April changes. Very strong summer, but now right back where we were a year ago, around 17,500. 17.7 to 16,650. And then oxygen, very same story again, in fact close to a 1-year low point, 17,670 to 16,000. So this one has like the lowest demand, so if you want to stock up on a little bit of your fuel blocks, probably some buy orders in oxygen would make sense here. But I was curious because I am making a decent amount of ISK in the coolants at the moment. Fuel blocks, no, not fuel blocks, but mechanical parts are reasonable as well. I thought maybe this could put a little bit of upwards pressure on the price, but it looks like that's not the case. Fuel blocks are basically still very cheap in the game at the moment. And that's going to be it for this Eve Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.